This is the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm your host, Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. My guest is Nora Mead Brownell, who served as commissioner at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, for 5 years under President George W. Bush. Before that, her resume, which by the way shows just about everybody in the power sector wants her on their side, includes time as a Pennsylvania utilities regulator and as CEO of California's Pacific Gas and Electric. Currently, she is, among many other things, a venture partner with the Clean Energy Venture Group and a director with Sunova Energy International. In this USEA podcast, we're going to hear from Nora about the potential benefits from and emerging challenges to smart meters. She's also going to talk about a new technology breakthrough that can overcome the challenges in smart meters and finally realize that long-delayed promise of a smart grid that uses the opportunities at the distribution system level to support power system reliability and reduce customer bills. Nora, let's start at the beginning. Give us a thumbnail history of the deployment of smart meters, known more formally as Advanced Metering Infrastructure, or AMI, and tell us what smart meters could do, and tell us why AMI is fully deployed in some states and uncommon in other states.
Great. Well, and I was only chairman of PG&E, but that was enough to keep me busy 7 days a week for over a year to get them out of bankruptcy. Wish I'd been CEO, but what can I say? Had a lot of fun. So
Okay.
we've had a history, and it's a history similar but not identical to innovation in other sectors. So in the 70s, we discovered AMRs, which allowed utilities to reduce truck rolls to read meters. Important because it saved on people, allowed the redeployment of people for other things. We moved forward and we had AMI 1.0, and now we are talking about AMI 2.0. AMI was supposed to deliver real-time data that could be used both for operational efficiencies, but also empower customers by giving them data, and potentially, if you really think through, to give it to aggregators who could do demand response. It didn't deliver, and there were a couple of reasons for that, and those are true even with 2.0, is we need a model that has metrics, and when we commit to hundreds of millions of dollars to deploy a technology, let's measure outcomes and let's give incentives for those that work and deliver on the metrics, and let's not on those that don't. And we didn't have that and often don't have that. So why was it deployed differently? Well, we make these decisions state by state. Some states are early adopters. Some states have different reasons and are not. Some states couldn't afford it. This is an incredible amount of money, which is why we need to do it right. And some states chose not to. And that's perfectly understandable, because what we learned from the early adopters was that, again, it didn't deliver on the promise. And what do we need to do next, I think, is something we need to think about as affordability becomes enormously important. But the utilities are faced with a bunch of issues that need to be dealt with.
So, do you consider, there's some interrelated questions here, and I want to put them all to you. Do you consider that 1.0, AMI 1.0, a failure, or was there learning that can be valued? And more importantly, whatever happened, it fell short. Is AMI 2.0, which is everyone is talking about now, to replace this now 15-year-old technology that's been deployed, is it going to lead, because of Moore's law and the coming quantum computing revolution, to the need for an AMI 3.0 and another big expenditure that also becomes outdated?
That's a terrific question. AMI disappointed in this way. It promised more than it delivered. Again, I don't think we ask the right questions. I don't think we, as regulators, and I can speak for myself, insisted on certain functionalities that we could measure. So a lot of promises were made that it would last 20 years. I think that's been said in some 2.0 filings. Well, here we are 10, 15 years later. It doesn't last 20 years. What technology in this world does. Secondly, it's difficult to improve upon the kind of technology that is being deployed. So think of your iPhone, think of healthcare technologies. You have some hardware, but you basically have a lot of software. So it's very flexible in terms of upgrades. And by the way, cheaper. So those upgrades may not last 20 years. I don't think you want them to last 20 years because the challenges facing utilities are changing every day. So we have cyber, we have climate change, we have physical security, we have a different customer base, we have distributed generation. So as those changes move through, we need to keep up with grid technologies, in which I would include meters.
So there's a solution. We're hearing, or at least some people are talking about this new technology that can avoid more and more taxpayer and ratepayer funded AMI deployments and even bigger costs. Tell us about this emerging AMX technology that's said to make better use of all of the deployed smart meters, and it can eliminate the need for more and more deployments. I guess it can be updated like my phone and my computer are constantly being updated. So how can AMX get electricity customers to a smart grid faster and cheaper and deliver bill savings by making the distribution system a reliability and resilience resource?
I'm really excited about AMX. One, it's cheaper, faster, more reliable, and gives you data in real time. So it's more actionable from an operational perspective and from a customer perspective. First of all, it's cheaper because it doesn't require new hardware. We can retrofit or leverage investments that ratepayers have already been made in AMR and AMI. That works not only for the electricity sector, but it works for the gas sector, who have broad deployment of AMR because their structures haven't really allowed them to spend the enormous amount of money on AMI. It also uses something called the Cube, which collects data 200, 300, 400, 500 meters at a time, can collect gas and electric data at the same time. So imagine if you're an operator and you don't operate in silos, which unfortunately utilities do, you could really leverage that. More importantly, it's giving customers data that they can use. It could give, as I said previously, aggregators so they can develop very surgical demand response energy efficiency programs that would allow customers to save money, but also allow the utilities to operate more efficiently, which allows them to save money. And some people would say, well, if I don't get all that money in my rate case, because let's remember that the business model depends on a cost plus model. The more you spend, the more you get. I would argue that the 2/3 of the dollars you don't spend on an AMI 2.0, you could redeploy to upgrade the grid, which is going to require billions and billions of dollars. You could redeploy for aging infrastructure to deliver the gas systems, particularly in more mature gas systems. So we may want in the energy transition to move away from fossil fuels like gas. The reality is probably here for 10 to 15 to 20 years. And God knows we want to keep that infrastructure safe. And when you think of other kinds of data that you could get, it could help across all of the functional business lines in the utility. And one of the things that I encourage utilities to do is to hire some data scientists, get people who know how to use this. Grab a few people from Amazon or from Microsoft or from other people who don't necessarily have a background in utilities, but know how to use data and see its value. If you've never had to use data for your business, you might not really grasp its value. And look, we pay utilities to be risk averse. I understand that. But I think we ought to pay utilities to take a little more risk. And I think we ought to pay them based on performance-based metrics. If you deliver, by God, I'm happy to, we used to call it at FERC, I'm happy to give you a little FERC candy. And that extends, I think, to an obligation that we all have. And that is that mid-level managers and regulators don't necessarily get exposed to the kinds of technologies that we do every day. We saw them at NARUC, we see them in every conference, IEEE. We need to create an educational system that is unbiased and broad to be able to teach people. I'm not going to tell regulators what choices to make, but I do want them to know that they have choices and they might be different than the ones that are being presented. I see a lot of $800 million rate cases for replacing meters. And I honestly think, what happened to that affordability crisis? What happened to the resilience crisis? What happened to the need for real-time outage information for everyone? So I want people to rethink, and I think we ought to pay people for what they actually deliver to the customer, like every other competitive industry.
What you say is verified by the interviews I've been doing this year with utilities about the need for flexibility, and the fact that what underlies the need for flexibility is a need to be able to process data. That's exactly what all the utilities are talking about. And it comes down to the regulators approving those things, which is why I want to ask you a question, Nora. AMX can be a solution. It can give those utilities access to data. It can give the customers access to data that can make systems more flexible and therefore more reliable. So why aren't policymakers, utilities, smart meter providers all over the country? They proposed 774 grid modernization legislative and regulatory actions just last year. 1 year, 774 actions. Why aren't they racing to regulators with requests for AMX deployment rules and spending? What are the obstacles, and what needs to be done to remove the obstacles?
I think there's obstacles on both sides. I think, again, we pay the utilities not for performance, not for delivery, other than keeping the lights on. We don't pay them to innovate, and we don't reward them based on their performance. We penalize them often, but we don't reward them. That's one barrier. Second barrier is within the utility, we have a lot of different silos, and they don't talk to each other and they don't plan together. So they're not doing integrated solutions where distribution's talking to transmission, talking to customer, talking to generation. And we really need to think about restructuring. And we need to pay people for the right things as opposed to the things we paid them for 30 years ago. I mean, we haven't changed. On the regulatory side, we need better information, better data, and we really need to think about the need for speed. I believe in due process, some days less than others, but we definitely need to have rocket dockets. And we need to make sure that we are introducing performance-based metrics and open solutions. A lot of solutions that we have aren't modular. They don't build on each other. They're not flexible. They can't be upgraded, as you say, on your iPhone, on your streaming options, on any of those things. When you look at other industries, you see that the reward structure is very different. But we need education at the mid-level of utilities, and we need education at the regulatory body. And I think everyone hides. I hear, well, the regulators won't let me do that. Well, really, did you give them 4 or 5 options? Here's what we can do. And honestly, Herman, I feel this incredible sense of urgency. I see affordability, resilience, customer satisfaction, reliability, physical attacks, massive, massive capital needs across the industry. So we can't afford to choose the easy, risk-free thing that we did yesterday or last year, and certainly not 30 years ago. We need to look forward, and we need to build a grid that serves customers in a different way, and we need to build a grid that is able to accommodate these rapid changes. If you look and you talk to any CEO, they'll say, I really can't support complete electrification for the foreseeable future. And they're trying. I commend them for trying, but we need to make sure we're putting the pieces of the puzzle, which I always say, together. You can't have all the deployment of EVs without charging infrastructure and without a distribution grid that's stable enough to handle it. That's just a classic example of how different pieces have gotten ahead of each other. This isn't linear. These are integrated solutions. And so, again, if I'm in a cost-plus environment, I might choose the most expensive solution because it may not last 15 years, but then I get to do it again. Well, guess what? I'm looking at customer bills increase 30, 40, 50, 60, 70%. It cannot happen. We just can't do that. And to me, it's also an economic development issue. If we want to onshore manufacturing, and we want to be global leaders, and we want to address climate change, we need to get a lot more, I want to say futuristic and enjoy more risk. We're not going to turn the lights out. We're gonna do this incrementally, but not death by pilot. I'm so tired of death by pilot, and I'm so tired of ratepayers paying a whole bunch of money. The concept gets proved, but nobody adopts it because, gee whiz, that's not the most expensive thing we can do. So need to change the reward structure, and we need to change the way regulators and the business delivers value for customers and investors.
Exactly. I mean, I have to thank you. My guest has been FERC Commissioner Nora Mead Brownell. We're out of time now, but she has said more perfectly than I could that we have urgency and we have agency. She has shown us that we have opportunities to change the system. It's good news that the podcast, in many of our previous and coming episodes, discusses the ways that we can make just the kinds of changes that Nora has described. Thank you so much, Nora, for sharing the history of USAMI deployment and use, and how something called AMX can take the potential to the next level and finally realize a smart grid and all its benefits. And as always, I got to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for our quest for energy transition solutions.
Thank you. It was so much fun. Thanks for leading the way.